Dear deep sea fishers of Reddit, what's the strangest thing you've seen heard on the open ocean? I was fishing off the coast of Malaysia in the middle of the night. Suddenly, the night sky brightened and I saw a bright glowing orb appear to the bow. The orb moved slowly across the sky, leaving a bright yellow trail and seemed to have sparks coming off it for about 20 seconds before disappearing into the night. After getting back to shore, I learned that it was a retired Japanese satellite ray entering the atmosphere. Same thing happened to me off the coast of Australia. We were fishing in the dark, and then gradually the night sky brightened, and I saw a bright glowing orb appear to the bow. The orb moved slowly across the sky and gave off a tremendous amount of heat. After getting back to shore, we realized it was now Sunday. I do a lot of night fishing off of SC and FL. I get a lot of fish that are bitten in half by sharks. Some of them had to have been very, very large. When you reel in a large sport fish's head like some kind of sequel to The Old Man and the Sea and realize the shark is close to half the size of your boat miles and miles offshore, essentially in the middle of nowhere, you get more than a little freaked out. I'm a diver. We were doing a night dive on the Great Barrier Reef when we came up to a cave-like structure, really just a rock formation, which is known for turtles. We shine our flashlights inside and see these huge F-King flippers. In there was a 100-year-old turtle about the size of a small car, in diameter. This isn't anything like the supernatural stories that you were probably after, but I found it very strange. Edit. We knew the age because we were told beforehand that there was a large 100-year-old turtle in the area. We weren't expecting anything as big as we saw. However, I was sitting in a little boat off Gran Canaria once when I heard a strange whirring noise, like when kids stick playing cards through the spokes on their bike. I heard it a few times and wondered what it was. And then it hit me. It was a flying fish. It literally hit me, and then floundered around the boat for a few seconds before I picked it up and hurled it back. Those things are goddamned weird. Its wings were gross. I had a friend who was stranded in a rowboat for a couple of days. He got pretty dehydrated, and later told us of these wild hallucinations of beautiful female water spirits encouraging him to join them in the water. It was strange because he was one of those no-nonsense guys who didn't believe in the supernatural. But he said these things were so real to him. Edit change hydrated to dehydrated. Thanks the Diac. Sirens. But no joke. Dehydration and sun exposure will FCK you up. And he's okay. My dad and I were fishing off the Florida Keys. We had our anchor out and been fishing for about an hour. 15 minutes later the boat gets bumped and we rock a little bit. My dad jokes saying looks like Jaws is after us, better stay away from the edges. Full stop. 10 seconds after him saying that the boat begins moving backwards. We are being towed by our anchor line that's in the water. Whatever it is now dragging the boat backwards, slowly getting faster, and our boat get pulled under too. Next thing I hear is no F-King way as my dad drops his pole, runs from the front to the back, grabs a knife and cuts the anchor line. After that we decided that fishing was not in the cards that day. I had a friend who would go deep sea fishing and stay out at sea for days at a time. He told me that at times he would hear some of the most bizarre, unearthly noises ever out there at night, and assured me that there must be things out there we have no idea of. Considering we apparently know more about what's on the moon than we know about what's in our own oceans, I'm inclined to agree with him. Things on the moon. 0. Things in the ocean. Out off Bermuda back in the 80s or early 90s we saw a huge piece of rocket fuselage or aeroplane floating vertically 5-6 feet out of the water. It was out in the Gulf Stream and was moving quite quickly. This was before internet, so we never knew what it was part of. Not a deep sea fisherman, but I was in the Navy. We were a few hours off the coast of Thailand. I was in the hangar bay of the carrier for morning muster and there were trees floating in the ocean, like they had been cut down and thrown in, bobbing right side up with their bare branches sticking out of the water. It was really weird to me. A friend's cousin is a tuna fisherman. They found a deer swimming over 100 miles off the coast of New Zealand a few years ago. Don't mind me. Just devolving here. I was on a dive boat off the coast of the Big Island in Hawaii last week. It was after dark and a pod of dolphins were spending a lot of time playing around off our stern. They were pretty interested in us, it seemed, since every once in a while you could see a head pop up and just sort of look at us for a few seconds. Pretty much everyone was hanging out on the dive platform on the stern when suddenly this huge manta ray comes right up to the surface about 5 feet away from the boat. It was easily 10 feet wide. It did a quick flip and was gone in a few seconds. It wasn't too freaky as we'd been night diving with them a few nights before that. But I could see how someone who wasn't aware of them would get really freaked out. The ocean has a lot of weird stuff in it. Not fishing, but Navy well off the coast of Malaysia. Found a corpse which was incredibly bloated and when rolled over had no face. We named him Bob. Went calabash fishing last year of Mitali Beach. About 8 miles out in open water, we were just sitting there trolling at a slow rate when we heard this humming noise. It rattled the boat a good bit. IDK if it was under it or nearby or what it was really. But it wasn't loud. It went on for maybe 20-30 seconds, then it was gone. Everyone heard it and said something about it. Couldn't have been the boat. The boat didn't sound like that. Pretty weird. We would occasionally hear Navy nuke subs going in and out of Coronado and this is exactly what they sound. It's pretty subsonic, like. Once we hit 3 kelp balls in a row and caught more fish than I thought possible. I am envious of the stories I hear about times where the boat was too full. But one time it happened. I saw a man shitting in a 5-gallon bucket on a 35-foot contender 100 miles offshore. He waved. I have been out in the open ocean, no land or other boats around, and the sea was perfectly calm on a clear day. Our boat was only small and it was not moving at all. It was perfectly still. There was no wind. The water surface looked like glass. It was eerie and slightly disturbing. Only comfort was I was not alone and we were not a sailboat. While on a sailing cruise returning to Miami from the Bahamas, I was permitted to pilot the boat while the crew sat down for dinner. I was told to simply follow a certain heading on the compass. As we were going along, I noticed the position of the sun was rather rapidly changing as I was chasing the heading on the compass. I returned to what I thought was the correct heading and watched in amazement as the compass began to spin in circles. We had been scuba diving, so several of us had compasses and they were all exhibiting the same behavior. The heading on the GPS was unaffected. After maybe 10-20 seconds the spin slowed to a stop back on the correct heading. The crew logged the coordinates of the anomaly. The best guess we had was that we'd crossed over an old shipwreck. Perhaps something hauling a large amount of some magnetic metal over to the Bahamas. How do we know these stories are true? I mean, these are fishermen telling them. A couple that are friends with my parents sailed from France to Africa then to South America. They also didn't have all the proper equipment you are supposed to have in order to do this legally and as safe as possible. They were a week or two away from the end of their trip when they confirmed their feeling of not being alone. At night they'd think they'd hear another ship but no sight of anything. They'd hear water breaking from something but never saw why. This continued and seemed to be getting closer. Then just a few days before the end of their trip, an American submarine suddenly surfaced near them. It stayed afloat for a while then went back under. His theory was since they didn't have a proper sat radio, they weren't aware they were being hailed to identify. The American Navy was probably like, WTF is this, and kept track of them or even followed them for days, weeks. At the end the Americans were probably even more curious. Surfaced. Saw a bewildered sunburnt French sailing couple. Not a fisher, but spent some time at sea. Used to work on an oceanographic research vessel. Doing box cores and piston cores of the ocean floor, brought up all kinds of things. Coke cans. A magic marker. Etc. If you're on an old steamer trade route you bring up a lot of clinker coal. Which is the burnt up coal from the old boilers that they put over the side. It's possible to analyze the clinker coal and determine what general area it was mined in England or Europe. the USA, etc. One fun thing we used to do was lash a small net bag to the cable that held the box core. And we'd put styrofoam cups in it. As the box core and its cable would ascend, sometimes several thousand fathoms, the cups would compress due to the pressure. We'd haul up the box core and in the bag would be perfect little styrofoam cups one stroke too high. We had hundreds of them. Also once saw a whale swimming by mid-Atlantic that was trailing a load of fishing gear, nets and some high flares. Was not pleasant to see. A Reddit is full of repeated questions that never end. However, this is a question that surfaces every few months and I love reading through them. Thanks OP. Surfaces. One was an abandoned boat floating past us in the night. From some of these responses I'm starting to wonder if people in submarines just enjoy f-king with people on boats. I worked on offshore oil drilling rigs in the Gulf of Mexico for a number of years. I know I saw a lot of things that were interesting to me. But I don't know about anyone else. The one thing that sticks in my mind right this minute is standing on the empty bow of the barge, 150 miles off of the coast of Louisiana, and seeing a flight of huge manta rays swim fly by below me in a jet-like V formation. I think there were maybe 9 of them together. And it was beautiful. So, me being a 19-year-old, I chunked a big piece of metal off the barge at them. A drop of about 90 feet. I didn't hit any. But they peeled off and dove just like a formation of jet fighters going down in an attack. I had no idea they behaved like that. I've never heard of anyone else mentioning seeing it before either. Have any of you? I don't fish, but when I was in the Navy we parked the ship over the Marianas Trench, which is like 5 miles deep, and went swimming. I did not see anything but in my mind. It's freaky swimming in water that deep. We were out at night once, with our lights off because we were admiring a field of bioluminescent stuff that was just stretching for miles around us. Really freaky looking but neat. Right up until a shadow twice the size of our boat started coming right towards us. We were deep sea fishing out in a thick fog one morning. Couldn't see more than 10-15 ft out from the boat. Fish bite was sporadic. Very quiet except for the water lapping at the sides of the boat and the occasional seabird or distant horn. During a particularly quiet moment, these couple of old guys started talking about the large passenger jet that crashed into the water years ago near where we were fishing and how they only recovered a small number of bodies from the hundreds of dead passengers. Staring down at the calm dark waters and listening to the old guys talk, I couldn't help but imagine the corpses drifting up from the depths and surfacing all around our boat. Imagined seeing the fuselage's silhouette in the fog. Creeped myself out. I'm a marine biologist. While at uni I went out to the deep ocean on a scientific cruise. We were trawling about 800 meters. Pulled up the catch. I found a hermit crab. What was cool about this was it wasn't in a mollusk shell but was in a hard anemone. The anemone had a bottom part that was hard and hollow, perfectly fitted for the crab. On top was 2 clusters of stingers. It was an awesome little symbiotic relationship in which the anemone gave the hermit crab shelter and protection and the crab presumably moved the anemone to food. Anyway, I tagged and bagged it for another scientist to look at. I never followed what happened with it. I tried to search if it had been discovered. I couldn't find anything. It could have been a unique discovery. One time I shot this albatross with my crossbow. I saw some shitty afterwards. Let me tell ya. I can't believe I'm so late to this question. I do quite a bit of saltwater fishing. And anytime I'm on a chartered boat, I always ask this question to the captain. On a blackfin tuna trip out of Key West 3 years ago, I asked the question. And without thinking, or blinking really, the captain said a dead elephant in the middle of the ocean. I'll never forget that. Same captain also told me that while tied behind a shrimp boat not far offshore, his client pulled up a large grouper with a human knee joint and muscle flesh inside its mouth. They went back to shore and contacted the appropriate authorities to let them know a shrimper had possibly dismembered someone and tossed them into the ocean. Weird stuff. I wish there were more responses to this thread. I'm not a deep sea fisherman, so I have nothing to contribute other than upvotes. My brother crossed the Atlantic sailing alone multiple times. When he was right in the middle of the ocean he took ahead, wasn't alone that time. He isn't insane, and came back straight up. He said being in the water and knowing there is 5 kilometers of it under you with God knows what in it was too overwhelming and scary. He has many stories but none I can retell with enough details. I don't see him so often as he pretty much lives on the ocean. One thing that strikes me is how all those hardened sailors pay so much respect, almost fear, to the sea and what lives in it.